Hey right bags, it's Jade with the top 5 laboratories in Grounded. Yeah, bit of an unusual one, but they're so important to the progress of the game. They're the big dungeons that we go through. So which one's your favourite? How can you really have a favourite? Is there a best one? No, but it's about what's most memorable. What one did you find infuriating because it was so challenging? What one had the best atmosphere? What one did you like because of the good rewards? That's what I was asking for in my poll. Over 5,000 of you guys have voted, and let's go. The top 5 laboratories in Grounded. So coming in with 4% of the vote, and obviously last, it's the Haze. Why no love for the Haze? It's got one of the toughest challenges, although it has been nerfed quite a bit since full release. Maybe it doesn't have the grandiose kind of puzzle sections of some of the other labs, although it's still relatively hard to get into. You're going to need a bomb if you really want to succeed, going through it and some decent armour, or go the water route. Make sure you've got a tier 2 dagger and maybe some breathing gear. It can be a bit of a tough place for sure, with the exploding weevils that you'll encounter, as well as a bunch of tased T's in the first part of the lab you'll get entrance to. If you somehow get snagged on a bit of environment, then there is a chance you can get done over. And if you don't have an axe, a tier 2 one to chop down the exploding fungus, then you really are in trouble. Ultimately, the Haze is an unforgiving environment, and the idea of getting in here is pretty challenging, especially if you've still got the Haze on, so you don't really want to stick around. It's relatively simple as well once you get inside, only having to turn on one lever to gain access to the final set of rooms. But back in the day, when you first came in here and there was an absolute ton of infected creatures, it was a real challenge. The amount of times I would die, I would have to cheese hanging around in this part of the corridor trying to kill as many of the creatures as possible. They have adjusted difficulty now. It's meant to be more reactive depending on where you are in the game in terms of upgrades and of course other players. You may encounter just a ladybug, a few mites, or you still might get really unlucky and have a bunch of infected larvae too. Of course, extra bonuses are kill this guy and you get access to the truffle tussle mutation, especially great for unarmed builds later on. But overall, I guess the Haze just isn't that memorable. There's no sort of grand epic moments going around or finding an environment that are interesting enough. It's just this one boss fight really, and having to get past a few quite dangerous rooms. It was always a bit of a waste as well. They didn't do much with these monitors. It would have been really cool to see maybe director Schmechter appear on them and give us a heads up that he was actually in the game, or something just a bit more involved than them just all being blank and off. And of course, making your way out, you still got to deal with that Haze. It's pretty vital though for progression. You need it to go ahead and craft the oven. And maybe a little bit more recently, but more worthwhile going and completing this early so you get access to the turrets as well as featheroos. But yeah, I guess apart from the boss fight, it doesn't maybe stick out in the mind as much because you just do want to get out there as soon as possible. Shout out to everyone before the Shroom and Doom update where you could only get into the Haze by using cheats or glitches, and seeing how different it's changed since then. So with 10% of the vote, it is the pond. I'm surprised this is a little bit lower than maybe the percentages would give, because this was one of the first to be added. After the Hedge, this was the next big one, and it was so hype. I leaked a whole bunch of details from this as we got access to the dev build. I was the first person to do a run through the actual pond and show you guys what to expect. Of course, then they did a bunch of revamps on it later. It also showed real progression, that you had to get certain pieces of gear to really get down here, unless you're some sort of mad pro that can do it with just a few little smoothies to give you a bit more oxygen. After this, the laboratories would get definitely a lot more harder. Again, this one not having really much of a mini boss, unless you count a bunch of the Arc Rs. Mechanically, the actual pond is one of the best in terms of what you've got to do to actually succeed. You've got to unlock 3 of the breakers before being able to go through more broken parts of the laboratory before getting access to the pond dome. Old school people will remember this, making it even more harder, where the fan would blow you. They took that out at 1.0. I guess they had more feedback saying it was just a bit difficult and making it a bit more too challenging, especially when you might only have the very basic breathing gear. It was always a bit of a rush to try and get back as quickly as possible. So yeah, I really like the pond. I think it's definitely one of the better ones, and maybe should have had a little bit higher percentage points at least, if not maybe a whole place. Considering how helpful and useful it is getting muscle sprouts so that you can go ahead and get the best meaty, beefy smoothies, then for sure the pond is so vital to most people's playthrough. One aspect that maybe people don't really like is that you probably don't need to go back into it much more afterwards. Like once you've done the pond as a whole, why do you need to go in? And now we've got muscle sprouts that you can go ahead and grow yourself. There's even less reasons to ever return to the actual pond lab itself. Honestly, I've had the most heart-rending moments in the pond lab. Trying to make it before oxygen run out has absolutely been some of the best bits. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Number 3 with 15% of the vote is the Hedge lab. So obviously one of the oldest laboratories and also had a bunch of revamps. It's the journey to the lab that I think sticks out in a lot of people's minds, that parkour challenge, and old fans will remember the old-fashioned Broodmother boss fight that was on the Frisbee. But the combination of the zip lines really made this really interesting to go through, and once you got to the laboratory it was similar to the pond that you had to find 3 things to gain access to the locked door. Maybe because it is also one of the oldest, we've kind of got accustomed to the challenges it faces even with some revamps, hence why it's maybe not as popular as some of the others. It is of course a early lab as well, it's really meant to be the first one that you take part in. And it might be the junior ore weavers that will give you the most trouble in terms of danger, but of course there's lots of spiderlings in here, and it's a great place to come if you want to get lots of bug parts by harvesting all the egg sacs. But apart from that risk of falling before you get here, it really isn't that difficult nowadays. One standout thing was the loot room at the top, and that was always good to go to get a bunch of extra resources. Overall, I really like the feel of this. Once nighttime descends and everything gets a little bit more foggy, it can become very ethereal. I really like the idea as well that we're using so many of the zip lines to get across the broken parts. And for where it is in the game, I still think this is definitely one of the best labs. Just don't forget to go and explore all the broken parts at the ground so you can pick up lots of raw science, more story data, and of course milk molars. So number 2, 27% of the vote, it is the Undershed lab. This was actually winning for a brief period of time before a bunch of you guys rolled in and voted what would be number 1. For lots of older Grounded fans, this is the culmination of what we've been waiting for, the ending of the game effectively. Yeah, there's stuff you can do afterwards and maybe get a better ending, but this is definitively the last boss fight you need before you can necessarily go and complete the game. The journey to the Undershed laboratory is just as dangerous as any of the others, in fact probably the most. And working out which way to go across the crevices filled with ore weavers as well as wolf spiders, black ox beetles, loads of mosquitoes and tons of termites, it really was a challenge. In fact, it's pretty exhausting actually, the Undershed laboratory. When you compare it to some of the others, it does seem a bit long, just like maybe the next one we're going to talk about, where it's a big process going through this whole area. In fact, you're going to be coming here regularly if you really want to farm certain things like the black ox horns or twinkling shells from the scarabs. So by the time you've actually got to the laboratory, you're kind of done. You want to just get out there with all the loot. Not forgetting the Black Widow that you encounter too. This is a boss fight in itself, although there is a way that you can actually avoid it by going over. But that's the Undershed itself. What about the actual laboratory? It is that sense of excitement. For the first time doing this, not realising what's going to take place because you haven't seen spoilers. When it first launched, us older fans were just really excited to see the conclusion and find out what had happened to Wendell. After the difficulty of getting through the Undershed, you'd think this last bit would maybe be a bit easier before taking on the final boss. But no, it's still relatively challenging with a mixture of obviously fire ants and then more infected creatures. So not the most complicated maze of laboratories or things to do, it's pretty simple, but certainly the most challenging I would say out of the laboratories in terms of pure combat. The Mant was massively unexpected as well, a true endgame boss and a great surprise. Not the most challenging compared to some of the other bosses and creatures in the game, but still worthy of a final boss fight. And then that stunning reveal that Wendell is unfortunately a little raisin boy. But it wasn't number 1. Number 1 is the Black Ant Lab. 47% of the vote, it is the Black Ant Lab. That's literally 2,000 votes or so. And yeah, I can see why. It's a real challenge. It's a maze of tunnels guarded by pretty tough creatures in the Black Ant Soldiers, which you don't really see anywhere else too often other until you get on the deck. And so yeah, facing off against these for the first time with underleveled gear, it really is hard. So you've got to make your way through the tunnels and then through the different laboratories trying to find the right switches to gain access to the final door. Lots of collectibles and making sure you're bringing the right equipment with you to succeed. You're going to need a ton of grenades to get all the secrets and obviously make your progress through the lab. Much like the Undershed, it's a real test of endurance, getting your way through and coming out with all the resources, being able to carry them all. For sure, you can kind of run past the majority of the black ants in here, but if you do need some extra bits, then yeah, you're going to have fun taking them all down with hopefully something spicy. But it's not really the maze, it's not really the black ants, it's not really the difficulties in turning everything on. It's of course the boss fight that is the most memorable and maybe still one of the most toughest challenges in Grounded. I have raged out so many times while taking on the assistant manager. No matter what game mode it is on, it's always a bit difficult. And it's because you do need a good amount of gear unless you're some mad pro. And the effects of them lasers, as well as obviously all the big balls of lightning, it really does do a number on you. So many times I've seen people try and do one life challenges or speed runs, and this is still something that can really get you. You have to have perfect timing to avoid the horrible, terrible lasers and make sure you're in the right spot so you don't get electrocuted by the pylons. All that going on, you've still got Haze T's and ARCs, and of course the system manager himself. So it's nice getting the brand new mutation that added as part of 1.0, but more crucially, it's the upgrade recipes. Now you can go ahead and craft all your brittle upgrades, as many as you want, as long as you've got the bug resources, and you get access finally to the elemental globs once you've gone to the sandbox with the assistant manager keycard. Obviously, all of the laboratories are needed to progress the story and get to the Undershed laboratory. But this really does truly feel like the progression one, the one that really changes how you go about things. Up to this point, you're running out of upgrades for your weapons and armors, you've maybe scoured across the yard and got what you could, but you are going to need to complete this one to hopefully then be able to get more upgrades and get more power out of everything. It still has its mysteries as well. We'll be back here eventually to turn on this button to get access to the room after completing all the mixers. It's just super challenging, getting through the laboratory, working your way through the maze of corridors and different buttons that you have to press to eventually get fighting one of the toughest bosses at this part of the game. I can see why some players new to Grounded may have quit at this point if they didn't manage to defeat the assistant manager, as it would feel quite overwhelming. And I guess that's why you guys voted it the most important. It's the one that signalled that progress, the end of your journeys through the laboratories before maybe going up to the upper yard to face on bigger and more dangerous challenges. But hands down, it is that assistant manager boss fight that really stands out and what people really love about doing this laboratory. Shout out to the Stump Lab. I know some people were grumpy I couldn't include it. I can only have 5 options on a poll. I didn't really want to have to split this over. The Stump Lab is interesting, but it is really only just one little parkour challenge. There is no enemies, there's no bosses, so I didn't really feel like it was appropriate compared to the rest. But don't worry, in the future I'm going to be doing the top 5, maybe even the top 10 most annoying things about Grounded, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be high up there. Big shout out to everyone that voted as usual, and let me know what you want to see me do a top 5 or top 10 of again. One of the old ones that I did before early access or something brand new. Let me know in the comment section, and thank you so much for your comments. Let me know why and what you chose. Why did you vote it the best laboratory? Until next time, Ratbags, laters.